Thank you. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Andy Gilbert-Dunnings. I'm Qualification Development Manager at Active IQ. I'm joined by Lindsey Simpson and Katie Lewis. Lindsey and Katie, if you want to do a quick intro, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, well, I'm Katie Lewis. I'm the one in the green jumper, and I think my name's come up on your screen anyway. So 3 years ago, we launched Workplace Mental Wealth, myself and Lindsey, and since then we've been providing insight to the sector, looking at the mental well-being of all levels of the workforce, and also looking at what employers are doing to support the mental well-being of the workforce. And that's what we're here to talk about today.
And I'm Lindsey Simpson. I'm in the blue jumper. And Katie and I are both comms professionals. Our backgrounds are comms, but I've specialised also in culture and workforce and engagement. So my particular area of interest is kind of that workforce experience and using evidence and data to help inform and develop and support the sector. So really what Katie and I are about is creating that kind of systemic shift to make the fitness and active leisure sector a healthier, happier, safer, more productive place to work. And we often talk a lot, don't we, about customers and consumers, and that's brilliant and that's really, really important. But actually, you're the people who are the heart, the mind, and the engine room of this sector. So we need to look after and understand about your well-being just as much, if not more, than we do our customers. So that's kind of what motivates us and gets us up in the morning.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, and just a little bit more about me. So my background is mental health, psychology. So I wrote the Active IQ Level 2 Mental Health Awareness qualification, also a Samaritan, and on a Monday night I lead a men's peer-to-peer mental health group. So I'm a great advocate for the importance of mental health in the workplace, and I lead a team of mental health champions at Active IQ. Just a bit of housekeeping before we go any further. Everyone's on mute. The session is recorded. During the session, we'll try and get you to be as engaged as possible. So I'll ask a few questions. So if you could put any answers into the chat box, that'd be really helpful. And then myself, Lindsey and Katie can kind of reflect on any comments that you make. Obviously, the session here, as you can see, is on your role in understanding improving workplace mental health. So we're going to be looking at the Workforce State of Mind survey that Lindsey and Katie are obviously heavily involved in. We're going to look at maybe some practical steps for you as employers. We'll look at the stigma in the workplace, any recommendations to improve mental health for your staff. Obviously, it's a really tough time at the moment, so anything that we can do to support each other is really important at the moment. Okay, then, so right, I'm going to pass over to Katie now, who's going to tell us a little bit about the Workforce State of Mind survey. So over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Andy. So yeah, the Workforce State of Mind survey, I'm sure some of you that have listening, hopefully some of you have heard of this in the past, but basically we're going into our third year now. So obviously back in 2020, the world was turned upside down by the pandemic, and everybody's lives changed in a way that nobody could have predicted was going to happen, certainly in our lifetime. Everybody obviously was forced into their homes, out of their regular working environments, forced perhaps to have spend a lot of time with people at home that they wouldn't normally spend time with. The kids were all home, husbands were potentially home, so people were in confined spaces and trying to deal with an environment that was really different to anything they'd experienced before. And obviously myself and Lindsey were in amongst all of that with everybody else. Being a freelancer, I was probably impacted less than a lot of people because I spend a lot of time at home working on my own anyway, but obviously very aware that if you're in a leisure centre, out and about chatting to people, you know, hundreds of people potentially coming through your door and interacting with you on a day-to-day basis, then suddenly all that ends and you're at home and, you know, trying to live in a very different environment. And I started wondering, you know, how is this impacting people? How is this impacting the people that I'm liaising with on a day-to-day basis, and then, you know, the wider industry? And I started having a look around at some of the stats that were out there, and the stat that everybody was quoting at the time and still quotes today, there's no updated information on this as far as we're aware, is that 1 in 4 people experience a mental health issue. And, you know, that sounded like a lot to me, and I was thinking that's in the regular run of life. You know, how is this impacting? Now we've all been our lives have been turned upside down. That stat is probably, you know, likely to be even higher than the stat that we're quoting. And then I started speaking. I spoke to Tara Dillon, CEO at Simpson, and said, is there any work around how people are feeling, how people are coping at this time? Are there any stats that I can look at? Because I'm, personally interested in it. My line of work at the time, as Lindsey mentioned earlier, was communications and PR, but I was particularly interested in this area. And Tara said, no, there is no specific data on how the workforce is doing. There might be individual employees are looking at their workforce and what's going on internally, but as a sector, as an industry, no, there's no data. So I then had a chat with Lindsey because I knew Lindsey was involved in internal comms, cultural change, and I'd heard that Lindsey had also just done her mental health awareness qualification, which was something that I'd also just completed. So we started chatting, and we decided that there was a real need to better understand the state of mind of the workforce at all levels of the workforce. So, from entry level right the way up to CEO, board members, everybody was in this unusual position. Everybody's got pressures. How are people coping? And before we can help each other, before we can support each other and put mechanisms in place to help people cope, then we need to understand what the starting point is. So at that point, Lindsey and I said, well, we'll do the research. Nobody else is doing it. We'll do the research. And that's how the workforce state of mind started. And so we put out 2 surveys. So there's one survey for individuals, and we invite anybody working in fitness and active leisure. So if you work in a leisure centre, if you work for a training provider, if you work for a supplier, anybody that's working within fitness and active leisure is welcome to complete the survey. It takes about 5 minutes. And we also wanted to understand, when we got the data back from how individuals were coping, we wanted to understand what employers were doing to help support good mental well-being within their environments. So we put out a second survey to employers and invited them to let us know, what systems they have in place. And as I say, the first one went out in January 2021. Then we did one last year as well, and the next one will go out in January next year, 2023. And we're really pleased to say that Active IQ have come on this journey with us. So last year, Active IQ supported us with the survey, and they're continuing the journey with us as well. I think all of us sat on this webinar today. Obviously, the survey is the starting point. It gives us the insight, but the important thing is the action that comes out of the back of the survey. And all of us, when me and Lindsey went into this, it wasn't just to give the insight, it was to support the sector in making our sector a happier, healthier, more prosperous place to be. And that is still our goal today, is to provide the insight, but then to support employers through a journey that helps them improve the systems they have in place. And I know Active IQ are the same. They're all about the solutions that come out the back of the insight. So that's kind of where we are. And the message from us on this, we're going to go through some of the stats now, but obviously the world is a different place to even where it was last year. There's so many more pressures now that we're facing, cost of living crisis, employers obviously more pressure than ever on their budgets due to rising energy costs. So it will be really interesting this year just to see where the mental health of our sector sits. So yeah, I think that probably sums up what we've been up to and where we hope to go this year. But we invite anybody to take part. It takes about 5 minutes. It's completely anonymous, so it's not connected in any way to any employer. It's only it's Lindsey that analyses all the data. We don't ask for your name. We don't ask for the name of your employer. So, and we're not interested in sort of that individual data. We're interested in the combined data. So yeah, you can be very honest. It's not going to get back to your employer.
That's great, Katie. Thank you. Just to say, I think the chat box now is working. Apologies for the issues initially. So if people do want to type in kind of why they are here and their job role, we'll be able to see that. So feel free to do that. But let's move on to Lindsey now, who's going to talk a little bit about some data from the 2022 survey. Over to you, Lindsey.
There's some good questions coming through already. Thank you, Effie, for speaking, and James. We'll get to that stuff later. Yeah, so as Katie said, we take a 2-pronged approach with the research. So one of the things that we considered when we were first talking about doing research is, well, maybe there's not a problem. We don't actually know if there is a problem or not. It could be, and wouldn't necessarily be anything, that because we as a workforce are fitter and healthier physically than probably the average workforce, wouldn't it be amazing if we had better mental health? So we didn't want to assume there was a problem without the data. So one of the key roles of the first survey was to understand, well, actually, what's happening, what's great, what's working well, and where do we need to develop? So when we pressed that first button, we literally had no idea, and no one did actually, what was going on in the sector. So the interesting thing with the 2022 research, which I'm going to share some highlights with you now, is that we had the first year to compare with. So it's not a trend, it's 2 years data, but we start to see a little bit of movement. And as Katie said, this coming year is going to be even more interesting, because every year we start to build that knowledge base and we start to see more of a trend. So there's so much in the survey. You can go to our website, workplacementalwealth.com, and you can download for free. All our research is given away for free, thanks to our lovely supporters, which includes Active IQ. And you can read that research for yourself. We've got the 2021 and the 2020 reports on there at the moment, and obviously the 2023 will be available for free as well in March. But I'm just going to pick out some of the key statistics. The reports are very quick and easy to read. Katie and I are both comms pros. We wanted to make our research accessible. Probably take you about 10 minutes to read it, and it's very visual and clean. So there were two kind of key trends that came out in the 2022 research in comparison with the 2021 research. The first, that was the people that responded to the survey told us that overall we saw an increase in mental distress. And secondly, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, we saw a decrease in employer actions to protect and prevent mental health distress at work. And I should point out that there is actually a legal obligation on employers. In the same way they have a legal duty of care in terms of physical health and safety, they also have a legal duty of care in terms of mental health and safety. So that's around prevention and protection from harm. What we tend to see is an awful lot of focus on support. So a lot of our work is about trying to understand and create that protect and prevent piece happening. So if you look at the slide there, you can see that in 2022, 57% of respondents told us that they'd experienced a mental health issue in the last year. So that's well over half. And of those respondents, 50% of men told us that they'd experienced a mental health issue in the last year, and 60% of women. So when you look across various other data sets, you often see that there is a higher proportion of women who are experiencing mental distress in comparison with men. It's not because we're delicate little flowers. It tends to be because women do more of the emotional lifting and the emotional work in relationships. That's well documented. We also found in the pandemic that that was amplified. So with a lot of homeschooling and a lot of the other admin that was around the home life, women tended, not always, I do understand it's not the same for all people, but that women tended to take that emotional burden. So in a way, that wasn't a massive surprise. In terms of the overall experience, we then asked, well, who'd ever experienced a mental health issue at some point? 73% of people told us that they had. That was up from 69% in 2021. Sometimes I think that's a really high number, and sometimes I think it's not. I think if we were to ask a room full of 100 people if anyone had experienced a physical health issue, I think probably everyone would put their hand up. And I think that's where we have to start thinking about physical health in the same way that we do mental health. We all have it. It's all on a continuum. Sometimes we feel great, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we can manage our own mental health ourselves. Other times we need some support. Sometimes we need professional support. So I think it's great to have these benchmarks, but I think we need to, it's part of opening up and having a more rounded and realistic conversation about mental health. Sometimes people say to me that they don't have mental health. I think what they mean is they don't have a mental health issue. Saying you don't have mental health is like saying you don't have bones. Like, we all have it. So language really matters in our work and when we talk about this subject. So this time last year, we saw that the pandemic impact was still there. People were still reporting that they were experiencing distress as a direct result of the pandemic, but we were seeing that reducing, but it was still significant. So as Katie said, we started our research in the pandemic. I so wish that we had done it before the pandemic, but we didn't know it was coming. We did actually first start talking about it in the September before, didn't we, Katie? So we didn't even know a pandemic was coming. So, you know, a bit like the whole, a dog is for life, not just for Christmas. Mental health is for life, not just a pandemic. So this is a more broad discussion anyway about mental health. I think the pandemic just brought it into sharper focus. So that's the kind of initial headline findings around the individual piece. So I'll stop there, Andy, because I could talk forever on this. So.
Well, that's great, Lindsay. Thank you. Now the chat box is working. It'd be really good to get your thoughts on what causes stress in the workplace. So, you know, this could be from a personal point of view. It could be from observing things within your own workplace. So please do type in any thoughts on that, and we'll have a bit of a discussion on that. Also, thanks for those who've typed in some questions already. We will come back to those at the end. So we've got communication, that can be stressful, absolutely, yeah. Managers' expectations. I'm assuming we mean unrealistic expectations there. Workload, staff shortages, workload, yeah.
And actually what you guys are articulating is the health and safety executive has 6 management standards that are related to mental health at work. And what you're describing are all these 6 management standards, that there's a very strong evidence base that when they're well managed, protect and prevent psychological and harm at work. So yeah, you're spot on.
Yeah, that work-life balance. So kind of, and I suppose during the pandemic, that was really difficult to manage, wasn't it? Where work was impinging on home life, and people who do work from home, that can be challenging as well. The work-life balance, unrealistic working hours. And
yeah, I mean, workload is a massive issue for a lot of people. And we hear that coming through. And I think, yeah, someone said, Zara there, I said it's about staff shortages. I think that's just going to be exacerbated, isn't it, in the coming months?
Yeah, I think the 2 big things when it comes to workplace stress, it's control or a lack of control, and that could come from lack of communication. It could come from staff shortages. So you can't control what's going on in the workplace. You can't control the energy increases. You can't control the external factors, and it's demand as well. So that the high demand, that high workload. So that's kind of the 2 key factors in terms of workplace stress.
And we actually asked in the survey, didn't we, Lindsay? We looked at what factors negatively impacted mental health. And the top one at 40% was feeling like you weren't valued and didn't have a purpose. So yeah, that's pretty high. And then the next one was 25% work-life balance, you know, people not being able to get that quite right. And then 19% said good relations with colleagues. So they were the 3 things that people identified as causing most distress at work.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what comes up this year.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thanks for your contributions there. Lindsay, I think back to you now, if that's okay. If you want to discuss the downward trend in employer action. So what are employers doing to support staff in the workplace?
So as I mentioned before, the employer piece is a really, really important part of our work, because most of the change that we need to see in the sector will be employer-led, because employers set the context against which employees have to work. And too much of the narrative generally and specifically in the sector is around support. So that's when things have gone wrong. So the analogy I like to use is it's like a fish pond. So if you have a lovely fish pond and you put all the fish in it, and you put healthy fish in the fish pond, and then they all die because the filter is blocked and the water is dirty, you don't blame the fish for not being resilient enough. You understand what the root cause is, you unblock the filter, you change the filter, you clear the water, and you provide the environment for the fish to thrive. So yes, of course, those who work in the sector, and as Katie mentioned, we do mean freelancers, any sort of way in which people do paid work in the sector. We're not just talking employees, but the environment that employers create is about creating that clear water. And then individuals, of course, have a role to play in keeping healthy and getting enough sleep and not coming to work under the influence of drugs and alcohol and things like that. But it's really employers that we need to understand what their obligations are in the same way they do with physical health and safety, which now is a given. We don't say to somebody, well, we won't put an A board on that wet floor and just see if someone slips over. We say, okay, there's a wet floor, there's a hazard, we'll put an A board on there and stop someone slipping over. So it is about understanding foreseeable risks and taking action. So we asked employers, and 77 of them talked to us, if they have a process for checking in on employee mental health. 40% of employers said that they did, but that was down 15 percentage points on last year.
And also, Lindsey, when we asked individuals whether their employers did check in on them, only 11% said that they had regular checks. So there is a mismatch there between what employers think they're doing and what people believe their employers are doing.
Yes. And then we asked whether employers collected data on absences due to mental health conditions. 62% of them said that they did, which is quite good, but that also means 38% of employers aren't. Why does that matter? Well, if you aren't collecting data, you're essentially going into this blind. And absence data is just one of the things which shows what's going on in your organisation. But we also found in our research that 48% of employees said they would not be honest with their employer if they needed time off due to a mental health issue, because they were worried about what the effect would be on their work or how people would treat them. So often they would either just not take that time off, and that would further complicate the issue for them, or they would just not tell the truth about why they needed time off work. So sometimes I have employers who go, we don't have a mental health problem, no one takes any time off. It might be that, or more likely it's that people don't feel comfortable, that culture is not there where people feel that they can tell you what's going on. So we then asked whether whether employers had team wellbeing in managers' objectives. Only 21% of organisations said they did. I tend to think that what gets measured gets focused on, so that's quite a low number anyway, but that's down 8 percentage points on the year before. So it is a declining piece. And then we also asked employers whether they felt they were knowledgeable and could act with confidence. 19%, and this is of CEOs and senior leaders, said that they felt knowledgeable and could act with confidence, which again is reasonably low, I think, and also it was down 9 percentage points on the year before. We don't know why. We aren't able to dig that deep into the data, but we think it's because reality struck. We think it's because senior leaders started to realise that workplace mental health and safety is more than yoga, fruit bowls and having some mental health first aiders. So that's what we think is going on. There were some positives, hooray. 42% of employees said they had a wellbeing strategy in place. That was up 2 percentage points on the year before. Again, that does mean there's a really significant proportion of organisations that don't. And the Thriving at Work review, which is a seminal piece of work, says that having a wellbeing plan is something that every employer can and should do. So there's a lot of work to be done in that area. And Katie will talk in a little bit about the pledge, which we're trying to use to plug that gap. And also 70% of organisations said they would value advice and support from a professional body to address these challenges. And that was at 77%, which had gone up from 63%. And we really welcome that openness, that increasing openness from employers. Again, we think it was reality striking and people suddenly going, hang on, we can see what this is costing our business. And we can see the real need to act to support our people. After all, we're in an industry that's about well-being. We must care for our people. So that's the headlines on the employer piece, Andy.
Wonderful, Lindsey. Thank you very much. And I think we're doing really well for time. So if we can move on, Katie, I don't know if you want to maybe kick off on this one. So what other key themes did the 2022 survey find?
I don't know if that's probably Lindsey as well.
Yeah,
Is it?
I'll go on that one. So there were other 4 key themes that we felt we had to pull out. One was really positive, that people felt really overwhelming. They had caring managers and colleagues, and certainly Katie and I worked in the sector for decades between us, and we see that and experience that. And 75% of people told us that they felt that those that had a manager felt that their manager cared about them. I work in a lot of other sectors, and a lot of sectors would die for a figure like that, I tell you that for nothing. And that's great, but it's not enough. We can see from the data that caring has to be translated into formalising and professionalising that by systems and policies and approaches and data. So, but it's still a really fantastic figure, and I think it's one of the reasons we all love working in the sector, because the people are so great. There was palpable anger this year at pay and conditions. We have a free text box in the survey where people can write what they want. So, you know, if we have missed something or we haven't covered something that someone wants to talk about, they can put that in there. In the first year of the survey, it was very much, the vibe was we're all in it together and we're all coping, and it was just the stress of getting through. In the second year, it was anger. Some of the comments were quite colourful, and people were, the cost of living, I think, was starting to bite a little bit. So that's something I think that discerning employers need to address, and I think there's an opportunity for employers to distinguish themselves from others by paying a fair wage.
And I think we're seeing, aren't we, across, you know, other sectors. This is obviously not just our sector where pay and conditions are issues at the moment. I think in December, the 12th of December is the only day where there's not a national strike plan in December. So yeah. I think this is, you know, this is a nationwide issue as well, not just something that we're struggling with in our sector.
It is. I think what I would just say about our data is that it was primarily customer facing staff who were in teaching roles. That's where it tended to be. It didn't tend to be managers and duty managers and things like that, or operational staff. It tended to be those frontline who were saying, I've been paid the same to teach a class for the last 10, 15 years and it hasn't gone up. So that was the main area that we saw that. Then we had to talk about a lack of diversity. We're not doing great in the sector. I know this is an issue for a lot of sectors, but for example, in terms of ethnic minorities, the UK is around 14%. We are only at 8%. We're doing better in terms of sexual identity. 87% of our respondents identified as heterosexual or straight, compared to 93.7% of the UK population. So I think we're doing there. We're quite open and inclusive. Where we're really not doing well is around disability. In terms of the UK population, 19% of people identify as having a disability. We were only at 5%. So there's a lot more that we can do there. The same in terms of the sexes. We saw in our research more women taking part in the research, 64% women, but they made up 81% of the part-time group, which tend to be lower paid and have less secure jobs. And when we went to the CEO and board level, they made only 36% of people. So there's something's happening at that managerial to board level. Why does that matter? Well, if we want to understand, connect with, welcome and meet the needs of the communities that we serve, we need to represent them. We need to look like them, and we need to understand what matters to them and address that in our services and in our facilities and in the way that we meet their needs. So there's some fantastic work being done on this, but I think we have a long way to go to better reflect the communities that we serve. And then, Andy, I know you're going to talk a bit more about stigma, but stigma is definitely alive and well. We saw, as I said, 48% of people saying that they would not be honest if they needed time off due to a mental health condition. So stigma is when people are concerned about being discriminated against because of a characteristic, and it really matters. If people don't feel that they can be honest and they can say what's happening to them, it means they can't be helped, but often it also piles on the distress that they're feeling. But I won't talk about that too much, Andy, because I know you're gonna talk about that now.
Lovely, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, so in terms of stigma, if you feel like there is mental health discrimination or mental health stigma within your workplace, or you're worried what your manager will say if you disclose a mental health issue, you're not going to talk about it. Not talking about mental health is known to make it worse. It'll exacerbate it, which will then make the person ill, make them go off work with stress or mental health problem. And, even if an employer doesn't necessarily care about the well-being of their staff, if you've got a staff member off ill who's unproductive, it's going to be bad for the organization. So it's really important to reduce and get rid of mental health stigma. So as kind of Lindsay touched upon, stigma is where a group is kind of devalued or seen as less desirable. And I think mental health stigma is reducing. I think we've got more awareness of mental health and we are talking about it more, but certainly within certain workplaces that there is still a stigma. Can prevent them seeking help. It can, as I said, lead to the worsening of the mental health problem. It can make someone feel shame. It can make them feel hopeless. And there's kind of three elements to stigma. So on kind of why it happens. So it could be a lack of knowledge. So it might be that your employer is unaware or ignorant around mental health. So kind of training may help overcome that or help with that. It could be negative attitudes, and that could come maybe from the media. The media may portray people with mental health problems in a negative way. Or people kind of directly discriminating as well. So it might be treating people with a mental health problem differently. So it might not be allowing them to work from home, for example, when, if there is a business benefit for them not, fine, but reasonable adjustments are things that are the key thing in relation to that. And certainly there could be some health conditions which are stigmatized or previously were stigmatized. But I would say that in terms of health conditions, whether it be physical or mental, certain mental health conditions certainly are highly stigmatized. So there's quite a lot on this slide which I'm going to touch on a little bit. So as Lindsay mentioned previously, there's a legal responsibility for employers to look after their staff's wellbeing, whether it be the Equality Act, whether it's the Mental Health Discrimination Act, and as a wider figure and kind of compared to our sector, Time to Change reported that 90% of people with mental health problems experience stigma, which is pretty shocking. That stat's kind of 4 or 5 years old, so hopefully it's a bit better now, but we're certainly not where we want to be on that. Just in terms of going back to the media, that image there of Stephen Fry, that head clutcher image, is really unhelpful in terms of stigma. People see that and think, oh, that's what people with a mental health problem look like. There's a number of issues with that. Firstly, it's not obviously clear what someone with a mental health problem looks like sometimes. They may look perfectly fine. And I suppose for an employer, that could be difficult. So that's why it's really important that people are able to talk about their mental health. And it could be something as potentially harmless as on your social media page, you're putting a story about mental health and you put that image on there. And that's kind of adding a little bit to that stigma. Is the use of kind of adjectives, the use of mental health terms to describe something. So you might be cleaning the gym floor and you're kind of saying, oh, this looks great, I'm getting rid of all the litter, or cleaning all the sweat. I'm doing it because I'm so OCD. That's something that people say quite a lot. And it is trivializing a really serious mental health condition. Many people who say that don't have OCD. It's probably not deliberate. It's probably not aimed to hurt anyone's feelings, but using language like that if someone with a mental health problem in your organization hears that, they're probably less likely to talk about it. Things like man up, things like, oh, that's mental, that's crazy, terms like committing suicide. Again, they're all, you may think it's a bit, political correctness gone mad, but the use of language is really important, and it impacts whether people are able or feel they're able to talk to someone about it. If someone's using that language, you're less likely to talk to them about your mental health problem as a result. There's a few quotes on there which, again, we've looked at. Lindsey particularly looked at this in terms of how people may feel in terms of talking to their manager. So that one about a third of men, that's from Movember. They've done quite a lot of mental health research. I suppose going back to what you said, Lindsey, in terms of women report a mental health issue more readily than men. And the reasons why, very valid, but it may also be that men feel stigmatized more in terms of their mental health. They feel like they can't admit they've got a mental health problem because it makes them less of a man. In terms of calling in sick, people will often give reasons, quite embarrassing reasons sometimes. People would rather say that they've got a stomach bug or sickness and diarrhea rather than admitting that they're a bit stressed at work. And 95% of people from a CIPD survey admitted that. So a lot higher than in our sector. So maybe we are doing something right. Another important stat on there, I think that 300,000 that's on the slide. So this is from 2017. So from the Stevenson and Farmer reviews, a big mental health piece of research there. So 300,000 people with a long-term mental health problem lose their job every year, which is much, much higher than people with a physical health condition. So why are they losing their job because of a mental health problem? It could be because they've not been able to talk to someone about it and their health has got so bad that they have to leave the job, or it could be because of the lack of understanding, the stigma that their employer just doesn't understand. So that's quite a shocking statistic there. I think finally, again, Lindsey touched on this about presenteeism and leaveism. So I don't know if people have heard of these terms before. So presenteeism is kind of when you're in work, but probably shouldn't be. And that could be because of a cough or a cold or something a bit worse, but also could be because you're very stressed. So from a mental health point of view, your well-being is completely shot, but you're carrying on being at work, and you could do with a mental health day off. So the top right-hand corner, there's something on Twitter, I think it was, where an employee had a mental health day, and their CEO encouraged them to do that and promoted it and thought that it was a really good thing. So maybe employers should think about doing that. Obviously, it's one extreme compared to some of the other things that we've looked at, but it comes from the top, doesn't it? And presenteeism won't happen if employers understand mental ill health more. So it's about education, I think. Leaveism. So leaveism probably is a bit less well known. Use time off. So it could be annual leave, as sick days. They might work long hours. They might take work home. So in terms of work-life balance that someone mentioned before, that can be a massive problem. Occasionally it's required. Sometimes we do need to work late. We do need to take work home. But if you're using your annual leave, working during annual leave, then that's a massive issue. And that suggests it's a mentally unhealthy workplace. So 83% of people in this CIPD survey, 83% reported that happens within their workplace. Not sure how that compares to our sector, and 2/3 reported that leavism occurs. So that's really, really high, and it's unacceptable, really. So yeah, stigma's something that is clearly an issue. Let's talk about mental health. Let's have these healthy conversations around it. Katie and Lindsey, I don't know how that presenteeism and leavism stats reflect in our sector. How does that compare?
We don't have the data for that. I mean, there's some recent data, some Deloitte data that says that actually I've got it up here. So in terms of work-related ill health in 2021, half the days lost were due to stress, anxiety and depression, with a cost to the UK of 45 billion a year. Now 6.8 billion that is absenteeism. That's the stuff you can tend to see. But then on top of that, you've got turnover cost. So that's people leaving jobs because they can't face being there. And then 26 to 29 billion is typically presenteeism costs. So as you said, that's the cost of people being at work but underperforming because they shouldn't really be there. And that's generally 3.5 times the absence cost. So Deloitte gives a figure that for those working in leisure, the typical cost per annum for poor mental health is between 702 and 769 pounds a year. So if you've got a business of 30 employees, that's over 22,000 a year. If you've got 100 employees, that's around 73,000 a year. And if you've got 3,000 employees, that's over 2.2 million. So, you know, yes, there's a legal obligation, but my goodness, there's a commercial case. But because it's not always easy to understand those statistics or to see the direct links, people don't always realise what it's costing their business. The other thing that I think it's important to say is that if someone's experiencing a mental health issue, sometimes they want to be at work. Sometimes work is a protective factor, in the same way that sometimes when you're experiencing a physical health issue, it doesn't mean you need to stop working. It just means you might need to make some adjustments, or actually you can go into work as you are. So work is not always problematic for people who are experiencing an issue, and again, that's part, I think, of the stigma that goes around. And actually we need to talk to people to understand what they need, but understand that in many ways work has many benefits for people who are experiencing mental health issues. So we need to optimize that for people as well.
Brilliant.
There is a stat also, isn't there, that for every £1 spent on employee mental well-being, you get a £5 return.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, the business case is so strong. We'll be doing more work on that. There's quite a strong piece on that in our 2022 research. If you want to go and look at that, but we need to talk more and more about that. Do you want me to talk about the recommendations, Andy?
Please, Lindsey. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So as Katie mentioned at the beginning, the research really is a starting point. We have to keep it fairly short and sweet because we want people to take part. It's anonymous. We feel that anonymity is really important because we want to hear how people really think. The data does not go anywhere. There is nowhere to track or to understand. We don't collect anything that identifies people. So with that, that also means there's certain things we can't do with the data. But what we can do is look at the trends, look at what people are telling us, and then make recommendations to the industry. And we also put together some tools to support people as well. So out of the 2022 research, there were 4 key recommendations. The first one is about having board level conversations and action. Most organisations wouldn't dream of not looking at their health and safety records and regularly looking at their stats and what's happening. I hear all the time, safety culture, safety is a part of what we're doing. Physical health and safety is just as important as mental health and safety, but many organisations don't have those same stats, some of the stuff we were just talking about absenteeism and all those sorts of things in that data. So every month the board does not get that data. If the board isn't asking for it, it should be, and if it's not getting it, it should be asking why, so that they can have evidence-based conversations and look at how they might need to do things differently, or what's working or what isn't. So that's that big call to action, is about board level conversations and action to effect that change. We also see a big role for sector bodies to support employers to act. They can't do it for them. This is an employer responsibility by law, but what they can do is help to support employers with research like ours, with tools, with talking about it at conferences, with plugging some of the governance gaps that exist. So we're talking to sector bodies about that. We also understand that not everybody has an employer. And that's quite a significant portion of our sector. So how can we assist and support and meet the needs of those people that don't have an employer? And that's often where membership bodies come in. And in fact, we've been doing some fantastic work with EMD UK, who've been really progressive in this area, to understand what those individuals need and what that might look like. So we want to support and encourage membership bodies to do that too. And then also at the time, this was very pertinent, was consulting on living with COVID. So if you remember back in early 2022, things were starting to open up. They were changing the guidelines on COVID. So that was very sort of the moment then. It will be interesting to see what happens this winter. I've just had my COVID booster. So of course we will try and understand what that landscape looks like as well. But those were the recommendations that we came out with this year.
Lovely, thanks, Lindsey. And just a little bit more from me in terms of potentially what else could be done. I think the first thing, as I touched on, is changing those attitudes. Changing attitudes reduces stigma, and normalising those mental health conversations within the workplace. Sometimes it is easier said than done. We've had a few questions about people being concerned about job security. How comfortable are people talking about mental health if you're not in a mentally healthy workplace? So it's a lot of it is about training, awareness, qualifications. So obviously the level 2 award in mental health awareness, Active IQ's qualification, can help with that. We've worked with a lot of providers who the whole workforce has done the qualification, so that's helped. There's the Mental Health First Aid England certificate as an option. However, from a regulated point of view, so obviously we're an awarding organisation, we're Ofqual regulated, we'd always encourage people to do a qualification where it's assessed at the end, so competence is assessed. A lot of the content obviously within the Mental Health First Aid England course is fantastic, but people attend often online, don't necessarily have to interact too much, and are made a mental health first aider. So just be a little bit cautious in terms of that. What we do at Active IQ is we've got a team of mental health champions. So they are members of staff people who are maybe struggling with their mental health can go to. So if they're not comfortable necessarily going to their line manager or HR, mental health champions is a really good idea, which has worked really well for Active IQ. There's wellness action plans. So a wellness action plan is something that's devised by Mind, the mental health charity. So they're kind of tools for staff to work with, to complete with their employer or their line manager, to kind of help identify kind of what keeps them well at work, essentially, and what might make them become unwell at work, and how they'd like their manager to support them if a mental health problem did crop up. And I think those kind of things are really important because they open up dialogue, and it helps managers understand how their staff's mental health kind of works. What are kind of some of the triggers? How can they help their productivity? How can they support them? So yeah, have a look out for that. So you can just download it from the Mind website. Reasonable adjustments I kind of talked about. It might be that a member of staff needs 2 things to happen in their day. It might be picking up their children and dropping them off at school. If they can do that, they're not going to be stressed, and therefore they're going to be mentally healthy. So kind of find out those kind of things, and that's not a massive thing. That's not an unreasonable adjustment. Talking and listening, again, people will often say, if I talk to a member of my team about their mental health and they disclose something, I'm not going to know what to say in response. often you don't need to. It's that listening that's really important. But if you can signpost, whether it's to kind of employ a assistance program, it could be a local support group, it could be an app like Headspace, could even be the Samaritan. So having those signposting options, you don't have to do it yourself, you don't have to kind of solve your member of staff's problem, but it's kind of knowing how to help them, how to signpost. Just a few of those images are on the slide. We've got an Active IQ acronym, which is really, really catchy. I'm sure you'll agree. It kind of, I suppose, explains, how to have those mentally healthy conversations in the workplace. So asking that question, are you okay? Asking that question again, so fancy a chat. People often say, oh, are you all right? How are you? And don't really mean it. Asking twice, asking that question in kind of a safe environment, over a cup of tea, not kind of on a gym floor in front of everyone else, that people aren't going to open up in those circumstances. Don't judge. Is everything okay? Are you sure everything's okay? It's asking that question again, asking twice, asking 3 times. If you're concerned and you keep on asking and showing your care, people will eventually open up. Encourage kind of professional help if appropriate. You don't necessarily need to give advice. That's not necessarily your role, but signposting can, as I said, is really important. When someone is getting support professionally, still being there to help, and finally let's keep asking that question. And you're all kind of good communicators in the roles that you do, and a lot of these things in terms of supporting people with their mental health is just good communication skills, active listening skills. The Samaritans offer some really good listening tips as well. And then finally, following some mental health core standards, which we've touched upon, which inform the Good Work Pledge. So I think as an organisation, one of the first things you can do is sign the Good Work Pledge, which Kate is going to talk a little bit about now.
So, as I said, going right back to the beginning, when Lindsey and I set up this survey, the idea was to provide the insight, but it's not necessarily providing any solutions. So we wanted to provide the insight and then give employers a place to go to actually start making positive change that is going to impact positively on their workforce's mental well-being. So we set up the Good Work Pledge, and the idea of the pledge is anybody can join the pledge. There is a very nominal fee of £100 because we feel that was important to get people's mindset in the right place to make the commitment, but hopefully it's not a barrier in terms of the financial barrier to joining. And the idea is, in its top level form, is to rally the sector together under a single ambition to say we're all going to work towards making this sector a healthier, happier, more prosperous place to work. And individual employers can sign up to the pledge, and they're not saying they're not setting themselves up as champions and as role models in mental well-being in the workforce. They're basically saying we are committed to looking after our workforce and to doing more to improve the mental well-being of our workforce. So it's a commitment to make positive change and to support the workforce. They don't have to be being brilliant at it at this moment in time. It's a commitment to doing something moving forward in this area of work. And once you sign up, you get a badge that is valid for the year of your pledge that you can then use on your marketing materials and your internal communications to let your audiences know, whether they are your workforce now, your potential workforce in the future, that you are committed to this area of work. And I think going back to some of the reasons people say they are distressed, the main cause and the main gripe in the industry at the moment is work conditions and pay. If we can't influence the pay side of it because of economic pressures, then we need to look at how we can enhance packages to encourage people to come into our sector and to stay in our sector. And one of the ways of doing that, I think, is to provide, a good place to work, a good working environment that supports good mental health. So that's kind of like the overarching aim of the pledge. But when you sign the pledge, we also wanted to be part of the solution. So we don't just say, there you go, off you go, we expect you now to go and do brilliant things and we're not going to support you anymore. Talking to lots of employers in the sector, everybody's on this journey. Some people are are doing okay in this area. They do have strategies in place. They are working towards improving the mental health strategies around workplace mental well-being. But others are on the very start of the journey, and some people I think are almost scared of it, because you say, you know, mental health well-being, and they think we haven't got anybody in our team that is qualified, that is a professional. We don't know where to start. There is an ISO standard, global standard in strategies around caring for people in the workforce when it comes to mental health, but that's kind of like your ultra marathon. That's kind of like the end goal. That's the gold standard. And I think most employers in our sector are more at couch to 5k. So a lot of employers, I think, are doing the good things that Lindsey was talking about, like maybe being aware of there might be yoga classes, they might be investing in some first aid training, creating champions. All those are great things, but there's a lot more that can be done. And Andy, earlier on, you made reference to a report that was commissioned by Theresa May back in 2017, which is the Thriving at Work report. And basically, she commissioned Paul Farmer, who was the CEO of Mind for many years and has now moved on to Age UK, and also Lord Dennis Stevenson, who's a long-term mental health campaigner. And she commissioned them to write a report on looking at what employers are doing in terms of the looking after the mental well-being of the workforce. And it's a great report, and I'm sure Andy, you'd probably be able to put it in your resource hub after if it's not already there, but it's definitely worth a read. And the premise of the report is basically that any organisation, regardless of size, regardless of commercial success, can adhere to 6 core mental health standards that are outlined in this report. They're easy to do, and it's all around good work practice. So you don't need to be a practitioner of mental health strategies, etc. You don't need to be qualified in that area. Basically, providing an environment that supports good mental health is where you need to start. So we looked at that, we read the report, we believed in the report. Obviously, it's backed by Theresa May, 2017, it's a while ago now, but it is the most recent sort of government-backed report that is in existence. So we set about providing some resources for our pledgers to be able to start really on their mental health, their mental wellbeing journey in terms of looking after the workforce. And it's all built around these 6 core standards that are outlined in the Thriving at Work report. So you become a pledger and you can download a diagnostic tool which helps you understand where you are on your journey at the moment. And then it talks you through an action plan so that you can start to score and to see how you're doing against where you need to be, and start setting yourself some objectives. So it is a starting place, but it is somewhere that anybody, potentially any employer in the sector, whether you've got one person that you're employing, whether you've got 3,000 people you're employing, it's all scalable, and it's easy to understand, and it gives you a starting place. And that's the main thing. I think we want people to at least start on this journey. If you're already on the journey, make progression on the journey. You can sign up to the pledge going onto our website, which is there, workplacementalwealth.com /pledge, and I'm sure, Andy, you're going to make the details available as well. I think we've got about 38 companies already signed up to the pledge, I think, Lindsey.
Around that, yeah. I just wanted to mention, there's a question here from James. How do we get people to feel comfortable bringing up mental health issues with their employer when they're primarily concerned about job security? That's a question around culture, because it may be that they need to be concerned, because if they tell their employer, they will be discriminated against. So it's for employers to understand that that's an issue and create, using, for example, something like the Good Work Pledge, a culture that does respect and create the conditions where people feel safe to bring it up. So there's no quick fix on that, and that's why we created the Good Work Pledge, because it's a way to meet employers where they are, to do the work to create those cultures that respect mental health and safety in the same way that they do physical health and safety. So we would really urge you to talk, if you're an employer, go sign. If you have the ear of your boss, get them to have a look at it. You don't have to be as Katie said, a mental health expert. This is about being a good employer. Most of the work we're talking about is being a good employer and understanding how that impacts people's mental health. So that's probably not the answer you wanted, James, but that's kind of where it is, I think.
Lindsey, I think that answers James's other question, actually, where James has asked, how do we get around the issue of employers passing on all of the mental health practice support exclusively onto their employees, e.g. not leading from the top? So signing the Good Work Pledge, getting together an action plan is a good way for leaders to start leading from the front, isn't it?
Yeah, also the 1974 Health and Safety at Work Act. I mean, it is a legal obligation. So obviously you probably don't want to go in waving that around. But, you know, if you look at our 2022 report, it talks about the commercial, legal and moral arguments for that as well. So it's just such a strong business case. And as Katie said, you know, for every £1 spent, you get £5 in return. So, but there's a big education piece to do. And that's a lot of why I guess me, Andy and Katie are doing this work, is trying to help people understand what the landscape is and how they can act, because one size will not fit all, and you can't just do it to your team. You need to do it with them.
And also we need the support
to be different.
We need the support of everyone in the sector. So obviously the insight report is only as good as the insight that is only as good as the responses that we get. So we, you know, the main cry from this for us is really to say to you as individuals, get involved, complete that survey, do your part, and then, you know, out the back of that we will be providing the insight which will help employers understand what you need. And the more responses we have, the more understanding we have, the stronger the insights, the more we can do to help you moving forwards.
Absolutely. We are just over time. I don't know if people do want to ask questions, if we can stay on for maybe 5 minutes, that'd be wonderful. We can do some quick fire responses. Just looking back, Roy asked the question, do you track physical activity stroke exercise levels against mental health outcomes? And if so, how strong is the correlation?
Yeah, we do ask, Roy, it's a great question. We do ask people to rate themselves across 3 facets of health and wellbeing. So we ask them around physical, mental and social health. And what we tend to find is that the physical health, probably not surprising for our sector, is higher than mental health. And actually we do an aggregated score for overall health. And what tends to happen is in some, when we cut the data, it is in some groups, the higher physical health drags up the overall score. So we break that down too. But generally physical health is higher than mental health, but not always. Often it's on par. We'll be adding in financial health for this year as well. So that'll be really interesting to see how that plays out too.
And then James has got another question about, is there any data regarding how 4-day working weeks can affect mental health in the workplace?
We don't have that data. There is a massive study going on at the moment, and I think from memory it's been shown to be very effective, but there is a massive, I can't remember where the trial is, there's a big trial going on at the moment to gather data that across a number of sectors. So I
think there's some volunteer organisations, aren't there, taking part. Really
interesting.
Yeah. Is there any other questions before we finish? We've got a comment from Zara. So no questions, however, just completely agree. Mental health is all about changing people's perspective of what mental health is. Employers need to understand that mental health is different for every single person and will require different needs to help. Yeah, absolutely.
Jack's put, my own mental health was very bad during the pandemic and subsequent lockdowns. Jack, if you need help, please reach out. You can, if you're in crisis, call 999, or if you need help, you can go to NHS Choices, you can go and speak to your GP, or you can go on our website for health and resources. There's plenty of help out there. So I don't know if that's a comment just as a retrospective, but if it's current and it's live, or anybody else listening to the webinar, please do reach out. There are a lot of people who are there now and they want to help.
Thank you. And then we've got, for companies starting out on their workplace wellbeing, what would be the first step for them? Pledge, etc., how to get started?
It's definitely just to go and have a look at our website and have a look at the pledge and see what that gets you. But like we said, if this is something that's new for your organisation, the pledge is a good place to start, because the diagnostic tool and the action plan are very, very simple ways that you can have a look at what you're doing at the moment. It might be that you're finding that when you start asking yourself some questions, you're actually in a really good place. You know, you're actually scoring quite highly. There's sort of a self-assessment element to the diagnostic, so you get a score out of 10 for each question that you answer, and then that helps you to highlight the areas that you really need to focus on immediately, and the ones that perhaps can wait a little bit. It helps you to put your priorities in place, and then it also helps to build an evidence case if you need to then convince, you know, someone higher up the chain that you need support from, you know, your manager or the leadership team. Then going through the diagnostic will help you build that evidence base for more support in this area. And then the action plan is really the first, after you've done the diagnostic, is the first step on actually taking some action. So go to the pledge, have a look, download it, read the Thriving at Work report, because that will give the background that you need to understand why we've selected the core mental health standards as we have, and that will give you a bit of context. But yeah, I would say that is the best place to start. It doesn't matter where you are on your journey. If you've started and you're, you know, a month or a year into it, that's fine. It'll still give you progression from where you are now. But if you are literally starting out, great place to start.
And you're not alone.
Yeah,
you know, don't be embarrassed. Don't be you know, lots of people are just starting out on this, and the most important thing is to get started and to get done. And we get that and we understand that, and that's why we put together the pledge, because it's something that, as Katie said, all employers can and should be doing. So you know, that's what it's designed for. Just nice to say thank you for your note, Jack. I'm glad to hear that you're much better now. That's good stuff.
I think we've got a couple more. Effie, thanks for your kind comments. That's lovely. Thank you. And then we've got something quite long from Roy in terms of talking about lockdown, kind of comparison to other countries which did not lock down as much. Kind of any data in relation to that.
Yeah, we have. I'm not aware of that. I haven't looked at that analysis in particular. Sorry. I'm sure there probably is something out there if you.
Yeah. If there's no more questions, just a final question from me to both of you. So how can people get involved in the 2023 survey, just to recap?
So the survey will go live on the 16th of January. That's the date that we've set to put it live. It will be live via our website. So they'll be able to go onto our website, workplacementalwealth.com, and take the survey. It takes about 5 minutes. And yeah, just by taking the survey, you will be playing a role in the insight that will help to shape the future strategies of employers in this vital area of work, hopefully creating a better working environment for everybody. I'm sure, you know, we're really grateful to our sponsors. Active IQ, as I say, have been involved now for this second year coming into this. So I'm sure all our sponsors will also be promoting it. We run campaigns on LinkedIn generally, and if you want to keep up to date with our work, you can subscribe to our Headlines newsletter. So we'll keep you up to date, and we will also make sure that you're informed, you're notified of when the survey goes live, so that you won't miss out. The survey will be live between 3 and 4 weeks, depending on how the responses are going. So you do get a bit of time, but I always find that as soon as you see it, as soon as it's live, sit down and do it there and then, otherwise you'll forget to do it. We're aiming for over 1,000 individual survey responses. That's what we got in the first year, when we were aware that everybody was sat at their computers probably and had a bit more time. But it is so important. If you can just take the time, it literally is 5 minutes and it will make such a difference.
And also, if you are an employer or if you're in communications or HR, we provide a load of free resources to help you share that link with your colleagues. So if you go to our website and register, we can send all that information out to you. So the easiest thing is to just go on and register, and then we'll, as a subscriber, and then we'll send you all the information. Data will go straight to your inbox. Easy peasy.
Wonderful, thank you. And just final comments. The webinar has been recorded, so we'll send out the link to everyone who's registered. Do share with colleagues or with anyone else you think would be interested. We'll also share all the resources from the webinar, so we'll share the slides and other documents that we mentioned. And there is a Survey Monkey to do after the webinar. So if you want to leave some feedback, please do. And thank you, Lindsey. Thank you, Katie, for your time. Please do the survey. Have a very Merry Christmas and keep warm.
Thank you, Andy, and well done, Active IQ, for shining a light on this stuff. Good stuff. Thank you.
To you as well.